Thomas Reynolds sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen with a mix of pride and worry. As the lead producer for The View, he had just pulled off what many people in television called impossible. Both Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro had agreed to be on tomorrow's show. These two men were Hollywood legends, but they had never appeared together on any talk show before. "This is either going to be the best episode we've ever done or a complete disaster," Thomas said to himself, as he looked at the schedule. The office around him buzzed with energy. Staff members rushed back and forth, making last-minute changes. Sarah, his assistant producer, walked in with 2 coffee cups and handed one to Thomas. "Did you tell them?" Sarah asked, sitting down across from him. "Does each one know the other? We'll be there?" Thomas took a long sip of his coffee and shook his head. "No, not yet." Sarah's eyes widened. "Thomas, the show is tomorrow morning." I know, he said, rubbing his forehead. "But think about it. If I had told Eastwood that De Niro would be here, he might have said no. Same with De Niro. These guys have never spoken publicly about their differences, but everyone in Hollywood knows they don't see eye to eye." It was true. While both men were respected actors and directors, their approaches to filmmaking were completely different. Clint Eastwood was known for working quickly, often getting scenes done in just 1 or 2 takes. He believed in efficiency and trusted his actors to deliver without much direction. Robert De Niro, on the other hand, was famous for his method acting. He would spend months preparing for a role, sometimes gaining or losing large amounts of weight or learning entirely new skills just to make his performance perfect. Beyond their professional differences, the two men stood on opposite sides politically. Eastwood had spoken at Republican events, while De Niro was openly critical of conservative politicians. In today's divided America, this only added to the tension between them. "So when will you tell them?" Sarah asked. "They'll find out when they arrive," Thomas answered. "We'll keep them in separate green rooms until the show starts." Sarah looked worried. "The hosts need to know what they're walking into." Thomas nodded and picked up his phone. "I'm meeting with them in an hour. But let's be honest, a little tension makes for great television." In the main conference room, Thomas sat with the 5 hosts of The View. He had just finished explaining tomorrow's special guest situation. "You're joking," said Melissa Park, the show's newest host. "Eastwood and De Niro, together? They hate each other." "They don't hate each other," Thomas corrected. "They've just never worked together and they have different views on acting and politics." "Same thing in Hollywood," laughed Joanna Wright, the show's longest-running host. She had interviewed both men separately over the years. "This could be amazing television, or it could be incredibly awkward. Either way, people will talk about it," said Thomas. "And that's what we want." "So what's the plan?" asked Danielle Torres, adjusting her glasses. As the most serious host, she always wanted to make sure discussions had substance. "We can't just throw them together and hope for fireworks." Thomas handed out papers to each host. "Here's the schedule. We start with Eastwood alone for the first segment. He's promoting his new film about World War II. Then, after the commercial break, we bring out De Niro, who's talking about his Netflix series." "And neither knows about the other?" asked Joanna. "Correct," said Thomas. "We'll introduce De Niro as a surprise guest and see what happens." Rebecca Chen, known for her diplomatic skills, looked concerned. "I don't know about this. It feels a bit like we're tricking them." "It's not a trick," Thomas insisted. "We're just creating an opportunity for 2 great actors to have a conversation they've never had before. Who knows? Maybe they'll get along." "Great." The room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. Then they all started laughing. "Yeah, right," said Melissa. "Eastwood will probably challenge De Niro to a duel. Or De Niro will go into method acting mode and become Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver," added Joanna, mimicking the famous, "You talkin' to me?" line. Thomas stood up. "Just be ready for anything. We have security on standby just in case." "That's not reassuring at all," said Rebecca. The next morning, the studio was more crowded than usual. Word had somehow leaked that something special was happening on today's show. Extra camera crews had been positioned to capture every angle, and the staff moved with nervous energy. In Green Room A, Clint Eastwood sat calmly reviewing some notes. At 94 years old, He still had the commanding presence that made him a star. His new film, The Last Battle, was getting good reviews and he was proud of it. He directed and played a small role in the movie, which told the story of a little-known battle in the Pacific during World War II. A young production assistant named Miguel stood nervously by the door, trying not to stare at the legend. "Is there something you want to ask me, kid?" Eastwood said without looking up. Miguel jumped. "No, sir. Yes, sir. I'm just a huge fan." Eastwood nodded. "Thank you. How long until we start?" "About 15 minutes, Mr. Eastwood." Meanwhile, in Green Room B, which was located on the opposite side of the studio, Robert De Niro was pacing back and forth. At 81 years old, he still approached every appearance with intense focus. His new series, City Streets, had him playing a former detective who comes out of retirement to solve cold cases. "Mr. De Niro, can I get you anything else?" asked Layla, the production assistant assigned to him. "No, thank you," he said, continuing to pace. "Just tell me again when I'm going on." After the first commercial break. Around 10:15, De Niro nodded and continued his pacing. He had done The View several times before and usually enjoyed it, though he preferred one-on-one interviews where he could go deeper into his creative process. In the control room, Thomas watched the monitors as the audience filed in. The energy in the studio was electric. People sensed something special was going to happen. "Are the hosts ready?" he asked into his headset. "Yes," came the reply. "But Joanna wants to talk to you." Moments later, Joanna Wright pulled him aside in the hallway. "Thomas, I've been thinking about this all night. We need to give them a heads up. It's not fair to blindside them like this." Thomas checked his watch. The show would start in 10 minutes. "It's too late to change the plan now," he said. "I'm not saying change the plan. I'm saying we should at least tell them before they walk out there. Give them a minute to prepare." Thomas considered this. Maybe she was right. Surprising two Hollywood legends on live television might backfire badly. "Okay," he finally said. "You tell Eastwood and I'll tell De Niro." As they split up to deliver the news, Thomas felt his phone buzz with a text message. It was from the network president. "Heard about today's show. This better work, Reynolds. Ratings have been down." Pressure, Thomas thought as he knocked on De Niro's green room door. No pressure at all. "5 minutes to air," a voice called out through the studio. Thomas Reynolds stood outside Robert De Niro's green room, his hand frozen in midair before knocking. His heart was beating fast. How exactly do you tell someone like Robert De Niro that you've set him up for a surprise confrontation with Clint Eastwood on live television? He took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," De Niro called. Thomas entered to find the actor reviewing his notes one last time. De Niro looked up, his famous intense eyes studying Thomas's face. "Something's wrong," De Niro said immediately. It wasn't a question. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. De Niro, I need to tell you something about today's show. You're not the only special guest we have." De Niro waited, his expression unchanging. "Clint Eastwood is also on the show today. He's going on first and you'll join during the second segment. I should have told you sooner." For several seconds, De Niro didn't react. Then he simply asked, "Does Eastwood know I'll be there?" "Joanna is telling him right now," Thomas said. De Niro nodded slowly. "I see." He stood up and straightened his tie. "Well, this should be interesting." Thomas blinked in surprise. "You're not upset?" "I've been in this business for over 60 years, De Niro said. "Nothing surprises me anymore." But there was something in his eyes that made Thomas nervous, a spark of what might have been excitement or challenge. Across the studio, Joanna Wright was having a similar conversation with Clint Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, I wanted to let you know that Robert De Niro will be joining us after the first commercial break." Eastwood looked at her for a long moment, his face giving away nothing. Then the corner of his mouth turned up slightly. "Is that right?" he said. "Didn't know Bobby was in town." "You're okay with this?" Joanna asked cautiously. Eastwood shrugged. "Why wouldn't I be? We're both professionals." Joanna let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Great. That's great." Though I imagine whoever planned this little surprise was hoping for something more dramatic, Eastwood added, his eyes showing he knew exactly what was going. On Joanna couldn't help but smile. I can neither confirm nor deny that, Mr. Eastwood. 3 minutes to air, the stage manager called out. In the control room, Thomas returned to find the atmosphere tense with excitement. Well? Sarah asked. How did De Niro take it? Better than expected, Thomas said. How about Eastwood? Joanna just texted me. He's fine with it, Sarah replied. I can't believe they're both being so cool about this. Thomas frowned. Maybe too cool. What if they just have a nice, polite conversation? That's not what the network is expecting. Be careful what you wish for, Sarah warned. A real fight between those two could end our careers. 1 minute to air. Thomas put on his headset. Well, it's too late to worry about it now. Let's make some television. The show's theme music played as the 5 hosts walked out to enthusiastic applause. After introducing themselves and exchanging a few jokes, Joanna turned to the camera. We have an amazing show for you today. First, we're honored to welcome a true Hollywood legend. He's a 4-time Oscar winner, both as actor and director, and his new film, The Last Battle, opens this Friday. Please welcome Clint Eastwood. The audience erupted in applause as Eastwood walked out waving casually. He shook hands with each host before taking his seat. Even at 94, he moved with the easy confidence that had made him famous. Thank you for being here, Melissa said. We're all excited to see your new film. Thank you for having me, Eastwood replied in his familiar raspy voice. The first segment went smoothly. Eastwood talked about his new film, shared a few funny stories from his long career, and even briefly discussed his views on the current political situation. The hosts asked good questions, and the audience seemed engaged. In the control room, Thomas watched nervously. He's being too charming, he muttered. We need something to shake things up before De Niro comes out. Just then, as if reading his mind, Danielle Torres asked, Over your long career, you've developed a reputation for being very efficient on set. Some actors say you rarely do more than 1 or 2 takes. Has that approach ever caused problems? With actors who prefer more time to explore their characters? Thomas smiled. Danielle had set the perfect trap. Eastwood considered the question. Well, I believe in being prepared. When everyone knows what they're doing, we can work quickly. Some actors like to do 20 takes, 30 takes. That seems excessive to me. Film is expensive. Time is expensive. Are there any actors you've wanted to work with but haven't because of different working styles? Rebecca pressed. Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly. There are plenty of talented actors I haven't worked with yet. Some might prefer a different approach than mine, but that doesn't mean we couldn't find common ground. 2 minutes to commercial, the stage manager called. Thomas spoke into his headset. Someone asked about method acting. Now, Melissa jumped in. What do you think about method acting? You know, when actors stay in character even when the cameras aren't rolling or change their bodies dramatically for roles. I think acting is pretending to be someone you're not, Eastwood said with a slight smile. Some people make it more complicated than it needs to be, but everyone has their own way of working. And we're going to commercial in 3, 2, 1. The director counted down. As soon as the on-air light went off, Joanna leaned toward Eastwood. Mr. De Niro will be joining us after the break. You two will sit here. She pointed to the center seats. Eastwood nodded, his face unreadable. In the green room, De Niro watched the first segment on a monitor. He listened carefully to Eastwood's comments about acting, his expression growing, more intense. Mr. De Niro, we're ready for you, Layla said, appearing at the door. He stood and followed her toward the studio. Back in 30 seconds, the stage manager announced. The audience buzzed with excitement. Somehow word had spread that Robert De Niro was coming out next. People whispered and pointed as crew members quickly rearranged the seating. Get ready, Thomas said into his headset. This is where it gets interesting. The on-air light came, back on. Joanna smiled at the camera. Welcome back to The View. We're talking with Clint Eastwood about his new film, The Last Battle. And now we're thrilled to welcome another legendary actor and director. He's won 2 Academy Awards and is currently starring in the hit series City Streets. Please welcome Robert De Niro. The audience stood up, cheering loudly as De Niro walked out. He waved and nodded to the crowd. Then he turned to face Eastwood. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The studio grew quiet. Even the hosts seemed to hold their breath. Then, Eastwood stood up and extended his hand. "Hello, Bob." De Niro shook it firmly. "Clint, it's been a while." As they both sat down, the tension in the room was electric. On the surface, they were being polite. But everyone could feel that something powerful was happening. Two titans of film, with vastly different approaches to their craft and life, sharing the same stage for the first time. In the control room, Thomas smiled. "Now we've got a show." The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro sat side by side, two legends of American cinema meeting on live television for the first time. The hosts of The View exchanged quick glances, each waiting for someone else to break the silence. Finally, Melissa spoke up. "Well, this is exciting. Two of the greatest actors of all time together on our show. Have you two worked together before?" "No," both men said at the same time, which made the audience laugh. "But we've met at various events over the years," Eastwood added. De Niro nodded. "Award shows, film festivals, the usual places." "Your careers have followed such different paths," Rebecca said. "Clint, you became famous in westerns and action films, while Robert, you're known for deeply dramatic roles. Do you think that influenced your different approaches to acting?" Eastwood leaned back in his chair. "Probably. When you're doing action, you learn to be efficient. You can't overthink jumping off a building or riding a horse. And in dramatic roles, you need time to find the character's truth," De Niro said. "Each role requires something different." In the control room, Thomas frowned. "They're being too nice. This isn't what we wanted." Sarah looked worried. "Be careful what you wish for, Thomas." Thomas spoke into his headset. "Danielle, ask about that Scorsese comment from last year." On set, Danielle nodded slightly. "Robert, last year Martin Scorsese said something interesting about the difference between what he called cinema and movie entertainment. Some people thought he was criticizing action films and westerns. What's your take on that?" De Niro shifted in his seat. "Marty was talking about the difference between films that take risks and films that follow formulas. He wasn't saying one is better than the other, just different. But some people felt he was looking down on popular films," Joanna pushed. "Films like the ones Clint has made." The air in the studio suddenly felt thicker. Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everyone's entitled to their opinion," Eastwood said coolly. "But I think there's room for all kinds of films." "Of course," De Niro agreed quickly. "And Clint has made serious films too. Unforgiven and Million Dollar Baby weren't exactly lightweight entertainment." Eastwood nodded in acknowledgement of the compliment. Thomas spoke again through the host's earpieces. "Method acting. Ask about method acting." Melissa jumped in. "Robert, you're famous for your method acting. You gained 60 pounds for Raging Bull and learned to play saxophone for New York, New York. Clint, you once said actors should just say the lines and don't trip over the furniture. Those seem like very different approaches." The audience laughed nervously. Everyone could feel the conversation shifting. Eastwood smiled slightly. "I may have said that. I believe in keeping things simple. Know your lines, hit your marks, and trust your instincts. And I respect that approach," De Niro said. "But for me, I need to understand everything about the character, how he thinks, how he moves, what made him who he is." "Even if that means gaining 60 pounds? Eastwood asked, a challenge in his voice. "If that's what the role requires, yes," De Niro replied firmly. "Seems like a lot of trouble," Eastwood said. "And hard on your health." De Niro leaned forward slightly. "Art sometimes requires sacrifice." "Is it art or indulgence?" Eastwood asked. The studio went completely silent. This was the moment Thomas had been hoping for. De Niro's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting method acting is just self-indulgence?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes actors make things more complicated than they need to be. Eastwood replied. The audience doesn't care how you got there. They just care about what they see on screen. But how you get there affects what they see, De Niro countered. The preparation creates the truth of the performance. Or it creates a performance that looks like a lot of work, Eastwood said. Sometimes the best acting doesn't look like acting at all. The hosts sat frozen, watching the exchange like a tennis match. The audience was completely captivated. When I directed A Bronx Tale, De Niro said, his voice growing more intense. I worked with a young actor who had never acted before. I couldn't just tell him to say the lines and don't trip. I had to help him find the character. And I've worked with first-time actors too, Eastwood replied. Sometimes the best thing a director can do is get out of their way and let them be natural. Natural doesn't always mean true, De Niro shot back. And complicated doesn't always mean good, Eastwood responded. In the control room, Thomas was practically dancing. This is amazing, they're really going at it. Sarah looked less enthusiastic. I hope this doesn't get out of hand. On stage, Joanna tried to redirect the conversation. Let's talk about your recent projects, Clint. Your new film, The Last Battle. But De Niro wasn't finished. You know, I've always wondered something, Clint. That film we were both considered for back in '88, Heartbreak Ridge? Eastwood asked, raising an eyebrow. No, The Last Temptation of Christ, De Niro said. Several people in the audience gasped. Willem Dafoe had eventually played the role of Jesus in that controversial film, but there had long been rumors that both Eastwood and De Niro had been considered. What about it? Eastwood asked, his voice suddenly colder. I heard you turned it down because you thought the character required too much emotional range, De Niro said. Is that true? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even the hosts looked shocked at how personal the conversation had become. Eastwood stared at De Niro for a long moment. I turned it down because I was busy directing Bird at the time, and because I didn't think I was right for the part. I see, De Niro said, clearly not believing him. Because I turned it down after reading the script and feeling it didn't go deep enough into the character's inner conflict. We made different choices, Eastwood said stiffly. That's what actors do. Yes, but our choices say something about us as artists, don't they? De Niro pressed. The tension was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca tried desperately to change the subject. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back... No. Let's finish this, Eastwood interrupted, surprising everyone. He turned fully toward De Niro. You want to know the real difference between us, Bob? I make films for the audience. You make films for yourself and other actors. De Niro's face flushed with anger. That's not true. I make films that respect the audience's intelligence. I don't simplify or cut corners. Are you suggesting my films do? Eastwood asked, his famous squint becoming more pronounced. I'm suggesting that quick and efficient doesn't always serve the story, De Niro replied. And I'm suggesting that self-important actors don't always serve the story either, Eastwood countered. The hosts looked at each other in panic. This had gone far beyond what anyone had expected. The argument had become deeply personal, touching, on fundamental differences in how these two men approached their life's work. We really do need to take a break, Joanna insisted. Fine by me, Eastwood said, sitting back and crossing his arms. Whatever you say, De Niro added, his eyes still locked with Eastwood's. As the show cut to commercial, the studio erupted in excited chatter. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Two of Hollywood's greatest legends in an unfiltered, raw exchange about their craft and careers. In the control room, Thomas was ecstatic. This is television gold. The ratings are going to be through the roof. Sarah looked at the monitor showing the two actors who were now sitting in stony silence as makeup people touched up their faces. I'm not so sure this was a good idea anymore, she said quietly. Look at them. They're furious. Thomas waved away her concern. They're professionals. They'll be fine. But as the countdown to return from commercial began, no one could predict what would happen next. Back in 5, 4, 3, the stage manager counted down silently with his fingers for the final 2 seconds. The on-air light turned red again. The hosts of The View plastered their professional smiles back on their faces, though anyone could see the tension in their eyes. The confrontation between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro had gone far beyond what anyone expected. What had started as a discussion about acting methods had turned deeply personal. "Welcome back to The View," Joanna said brightly. "We're here with Hollywood legends Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro." The camera panned to show both men, sitting stiffly next to each other. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. "Before the break, we were having a fascinating discussion about different approaches to acting," Rebecca said carefully. "Maybe we could shift gears a bit and talk about your experiences as directors." De Niro nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Eastwood. "Actually, I'd like to address something Clint said before the break, about making films for the audience versus making films for myself." The hosts exchanged nervous glances. In the control room, Thomas leaned forward, his eyes glued to the monitor. "Every film I've made," De Niro continued, his voice steady but intense, "every character I've played, I always think about the audience. Always. The difference is, I don't underestimate them. I believe audiences want characters with real depth and complexity." Eastwood turned to face him directly. "And you think my characters lack depth?" "I didn't say that," De Niro replied. "But I think your approach sometimes sacrifices depth for efficiency. And I think your approach sometimes sacrifices clarity for complexity," Eastwood shot back. "The audience shouldn't need a roadmap to understand a character's motivations." The tension in the studio was unbearable. Some audience members looked uncomfortable while others were completely captivated. Melissa tried to jump in. "Both of you have directed some incredible films. Is your directing style similar to your acting style?" "Directing is different," Eastwood said, his eyes still locked with De Niro's. "As a director, my job is to create an environment where actors can do their best work. Some need more guidance, some need less. A good director knows when to push and when to step back." "On that, we agree," De Niro said, surprising everyone. "When I direct, I try to give actors what I would want as an actor. Sometimes that's guidance, sometimes it's space." For the first time, there seemed to be a small bridge forming between their positions. "You were excellent in The Irishman," Eastwood said suddenly. "That scene where you're on the phone finding out Jimmy Hoffa is dead, simple, understated, powerful." The compliment seemed to catch De Niro off guard. "Thank you," he said. "And I've always admired how you handled the final scene in Unforgiven, when William Money reverts back to his true nature. There's so much happening beneath the surface." A strange current passed between the two men, a moment of mutual respect. Amid their disagreement, in the control room, Thomas frowned. "What's happening? They're being nice to each other now?" Sarah smiled. "Maybe they actually respect each other more than they let on." Back on stage, Danielle decided to take a risk. "Both of you have been outspoken about politics over the years, and you clearly have different views. Has that affected how you see each other's work?" The studio went silent. This was even more dangerous territory than their artistic differences. Eastwood took a deep breath. "I can separate the art from the artist. I don't have to agree with someone's politics to appreciate their talent." "Same here," De Niro nodded. "I've never let political differences affect how I view someone's work. Although," Eastwood added with the hint of a smile, "I do think it's ironic that you're so liberal in your politics but so conservative in your acting. You stick to the rules of method, acting like they're the 10 Commandments." There was a moment of silence, and then, to everyone's surprise, De Niro laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh. "And you're conservative in politics but experimental in your work," De Niro countered. "Always trying new things, breaking rules." Eastwood's smile grew wider. "Maybe we're not so different after all." The atmosphere in the studio suddenly shifted. What had been tense and confrontational now felt almost playful. In the control room, Thomas was confused. "What's going on? Are they friends now?" On stage, Rebecca tried to follow this new direction. "So, despite your different approaches, you both respect each other's work?" "Of course," De Niro said. Clint is a legend for a reason. His films connect with people. They have a clarity and power that's undeniable. And Bob goes deeper than almost any actor alive, Eastwood added. What he's willing to put himself through for a role, it's impressive, even if it's not my way. The hosts looked at each other, puzzled by this sudden shift. Then Eastwood leaned back in his chair and did something completely unexpected. He laughed. It started as a low chuckle and grew until his shoulders were shaking. I think we've given them enough, he said to De Niro. De Niro's serious expression held for a moment longer, and then he too broke into a smile, probably more than enough. The hosts and audience looked completely confused. What's happening? Joanna asked. Eastwood turned to the audience. I've known Bob for over 40 years. We've never worked together, but we've been friends since the 70s. Gasps filled the studio. In the control room, Thomas's jaw dropped. Friends? He whispered. We have dinner whenever we're in the same city, De Niro explained. Usually about twice a year. We argue about politics, movies, acting, everything, but always in private. When your producer called us separately about being on the show, Eastwood continued, we figured out what was happening. They wanted a fight. So we decided to give them one, De Niro added with a sly smile. The studio erupted in surprised laughter and applause. The hosts looked stunned. Wait, Melissa said, trying to process this information. So that whole argument was partly real, partly exaggerated, Eastwood explained. We do have different approaches to acting and filmmaking. That's true. But we respect those differences, De Niro added. And we certainly don't hate each other, which is what your producer seemed to be hoping for. In the control room, Thomas sank into his chair. They played us, he muttered. They completely played us. Sarah couldn't help laughing. This is even better than what you planned. On stage, Joanna had recovered enough to ask, so you two planned this beforehand? Not in detail, Eastwood said. We just agreed to start with our real differences and see where it went. And then take it a bit further than we normally would, De Niro added. But why? Rebecca asked, still confused. Eastwood's expression grew more serious. Because there's too much of this in our culture now. People with different views are expected to hate each other, to fight like enemies. We wanted to show that's not how it has to be, De Niro said. You can disagree, even strongly disagree, and still respect each other, still be friends. The audience broke into applause again, louder this time. Many people stood up. That's actually a beautiful message, Danielle said, especially coming from two people who are known to have such different political views. Politics isn't everything, Eastwood said simply. Neither is how you approach your work. Character matters more, loyalty, honesty, and a sense of humor, De Niro added with another smile. As the audience continued applauding, the two men looked at each other with genuine warmth. Their plan had worked perfectly. What had seemed like a bitter confrontation had transformed into a powerful message about friendship across differences. In the control room, Thomas had recovered from his shock and was now smiling. This is even better than what I planned, he admitted. This is going to go viral for all the right reasons. Should we be mad that they tricked us? Sarah asked. Thomas shook his head. How can you be mad at two legends teaching us all a lesson about civility? This is the best episode we've ever done. As the show prepared to go to its final commercial break, no one in the studio could have predicted how this confrontation would turn out, least of all the producers who had tried to engineer it. By the time The View ended, the studio was filled with a feeling of joy and surprise. What had started as an attempt to create conflict between two Hollywood legends had turned into something much more meaningful. As the cameras stopped rolling, the audience gave Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro a standing ovation. Thank you both for being here today, Joanna said, shaking their hands. I think we all learned something important. The other hosts gathered around, asking questions about their long friendship that had remained secret from the public for so many years. How did you two first meet? Melissa asked. At a small dinner party in 1978, Eastwood explained. Francis Ford Coppola's house, I think, De Niro nodded. We argued about baseball for 3 hours. He's a Giants fan, I'm a Yankees fan. And that was the start of a beautiful friendship, Eastwood added with a smile. As they talked, Thomas Reynolds made his way from the control room to the stage. His face showed a mix of embarrassment and admiration. Mr. Eastwood, Mr. De Niro, he said, approaching cautiously. I owe you both an apology. What I tried to do today wasn't right. Eastwood studied him for a moment. No harm done. In fact, I think it worked out pretty well. Better than you planned, De Niro added. Thomas smiled awkwardly. Much better. The network president just called. He said it was the best episode in years. See? Eastwood said. Sometimes things don't go according to plan, but they still turn out all right. As the studio began to clear out, a young production assistant approached the two actors hesitantly. Excuse me, Mr. Eastwood, Mr. De Niro, she said nervously. I just wanted to say that was amazing. The message about friendship despite differences. We really need that right now. Both men thanked her, and as she walked away, De Niro turned to Eastwood. Lunch? I know a good place a few blocks from here, Eastwood replied. Italian. You'll approve. They gathered their things and headed for the exit. Outside the studio, word had already spread. A small crowd of reporters and fans had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the two stars. Mr. Eastwood, Mr. De Niro, a reporter called out. Can you tell us more about your friendship? Why keep it secret all these years? Eastwood looked at De Niro, who nodded for him to answer. It wasn't really a secret, Eastwood explained. We just never talked about it publicly. Some things you keep for yourself. Are there other famous enemies in Hollywood who are actually friends? Another reporter asked. De Niro smiled. Probably, but that's for them to reveal, not us. They pushed through the crowd and got into a waiting car. As they drove away, both men seemed relieved to be out of the spotlight. That went better than expected, De Niro said. Much better, Eastwood agreed. Though I'm not sure I like being seen as a wise old man spreading messages about friendship and understanding. De Niro laughed. Get used to it. At our age, that's what people expect. Speaking of age, Eastwood said, your birthday's coming up next month. 79, right? Don't remind me, De Niro groaned. What about you? 94 and still directing movies. What's your secret? I don't waste energy, Eastwood said with a small smile. And I don't do 40 takes of every scene. De Niro shook his head. After all these years, you're still giving me a hard time about that. Someone has to, Eastwood replied. Meanwhile, back at the studio, the clips from the show were already spreading across social media. The Mousserine, Eastwood De Niro was trending, and the video of their revelation had been viewed millions of times in just an hour. In the production office, Thomas sat with his team, watching the numbers grow. This is incredible, Sarah said. People are calling. It's the most authentic moment on daytime television in years. Thomas nodded, still processing what had happened. They completely turned the tables on us. We wanted conflict, and they gave us wisdom. The network is thrilled, another producer added. They're talking about a special follow-up episode. Thomas laughed. Good luck with that. I doubt they'd fall for the same trick twice. Just then his phone rang. It was Joanna. Have you seen what's happening online? She asked excitedly. This is going viral in the best possible way. I know, Thomas replied. It's amazing. And guess what? I just got a text from Brad Pitt. He wants to come on the show with George Clooney next month. Apparently they've been watching. Thomas nearly dropped his phone. Are you serious? That would be huge. Very serious, Joanna said. But no tricks this time, Thomas, just an honest conversation. Absolutely, he promised. I've learned my lesson. After hanging up, Thomas looked at the monitor again. The clip was now playing on CNN with the headline, Hollywood Legends Reveal Decades-Long Secret Friendship. Sometimes the best stories are the ones you don't try to engineer, he said quietly. At a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from the studio, Eastwood and De Niro sat at a corner table, enjoying their meal away from curious eyes. The owner, an old friend of De Niro's, had given them a private space. "You know," De Niro said, twirling pasta on his fork, "we should have done this years. Appeared together, I mean." "Maybe," Eastwood replied. "But it wouldn't have had the same impact. The timing was right." De Niro nodded thoughtfully. "That's true, and now people will be looking for other secret friendships in Hollywood." "Let them look," Eastwood said. "It's good for people to remember that public disagreements don't have to mean personal hatred." "Especially these days," De Niro agreed. "Everything is so divided." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Eastwood looked up with a mischievous gleam in his eye. "So," he said, "I've been thinking about a new project. A film about two old guys who can't stand each other's methods but have to work together." De Niro raised an eyebrow. "Art imitating life?" "More like art exaggerating life," Eastwood replied. "I'd direct. You'd star." "And who would play the other old guy?" De Niro asked, though he already knew the answer. "Me, of course," Eastwood said. "One last acting role before I retire." "You've been threatening to retire for 20 years, De Niro pointed out. "This time I mean it," Eastwood said. "Maybe." De Niro smiled. "I'd read that script." "I'll send it when it's ready," Eastwood promised. As they finished their meal, both men seemed content. What had started as a television producer's attempt to create conflict had ended with the possibility of a real collaboration between two of cinema's greatest legends. Outside the restaurant, life in New York continued as usual. People rushed, by many of them discussing what they had just seen on The View. The story of the two old friends who had fooled everyone would be talked about for years to come. Some would say it was all planned by the show's producers. Others would claim it was completely spontaneous. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. Just like the friendship between two very different men who had found common ground in their love of film, their respect for craft, and their understanding that the best arguments happen between friends who aren't afraid to disagree. As they left the restaurant, a young woman recognized them and asked for a photo. They agreed, standing side by side, the gunslinger and the gangster, the conservative, and the liberal, the minimalist and the method actor. Friends, despite everything that should have kept them apart. The end.